Hello wrestling fans. Pro Wrestle Machine is back. Hello to all the new followers. If this is your first time here, I'm a robot. Let's jump back in time to 1992. August 10, 1992 Observer Newsletter. Ron Simmons wins WCW title. Follow-up on recent major stories. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228. August 10, 1992. Ron Simmons captured the WCW World Heavyweight title on August 2 in Baltimore by pinning Big Van Vader in 9:46 at the Worldwide Wrestling Television taping with a power slam. The match was said to have been very good. It, along with the angle that debuted Jake Roberts, will air in a 6 minutes highlight block on TBS this coming weekend. The entire match was taped for television and will at some point air in its entirety, although I'm not certain when and what show that will be on. Vader had been advertised to defend the title against Sting on Sunday's night's card. However, earlier in the taping an angle was set up where Roberts came out of the audience and gave Sting 2 DDTs on a chair, and Sting did a stretcher job and was unable to wrestle in the main event. Bill Watts and Grizzly Smith came out with the top 7 contenders. Unfortunately, this crew didn't include U.S. champ Rick Rude or TV champ Steve Austin, and instead had Dan Spivey, Van Hammer, Simmons, Barbarian, Cactus Jack, Dustin Rhodes and one another, and announced they had their names in a bowl and Smith was to pick out the contend. Rude came down and demanded his name to put in as well, but of course they picked out Simmons' name to get the title shot. From all reports, this was a really hot crowd and taping from start to finish. Virtually everyone who contacted us had nothing but good thing to say about the card overall, particularly the crowd heat and execution of the Roberts angle and the title change match. The show should also look good on television since there were nearly 8,000 fans in the building with big crowd reactions for the 2 major angles. They had a promotion where they let 2 kids in free with each paying adult, so the actual paid was under $4,000, and the house was close to $35,000. The best thing about Simmons winning the title is that hopefully never again do we have to hear this promotion do outdated race-baiting hype every time an African American gets a title shot. They did interviews in the building until about 1 a.m. after the show for airing as early as this weekend, and there were implicit instructions made not to bring up the subject of race relating to Simmons winning the title. All advertised Vader vs. Sting title matches starting back on the road on August 5 in Raleigh, North Carolina will be changed to Simmons defending against Vader and Sting vs. Super Invader, Simmons vs. Super Invader being what has been advertised. Roberts starts at the house shows on August 9 in Chicago against Marcus Bagwell, and his first match with Sting will be August 15 in Jacksonville. Apparently, in order to get his release from the WWF that would allow him to work for WCW, Roberts gave up his rights to all future merchandising income, since stuff with his likeness will continue to be sold for a long time. WCW held a legit press conference in CNN Center on Tuesday afternoon introducing Simmons as the new champion. Sting's injury was set up during a U.S. title match with Rick Rude defending against Nikita Koloff, in what was also said to have been a very good match. Koloff hit Rude with a sickle, but there was a ref bump. At that point, Cactus Jack hit the ring with a chair. Before he could use the chair, Sting was in to make the save. Roberts came out of the audience and attacked Sting and gave him 2 DDTs on the chair. Several babyfaces came out and Roberts pulled out a gigantic snake, and the faces scattered acting afraid of the snake, so they are going to use that gimmick and put Roberts over huge. While this isn't definite, don't expect Roberts to use the snake as a prop in the future. Roberts, who will be the kayfabe Bad Bob listed on the booking sheets, will work singles with Sting and some tag team main events teaming with Vader against Sting and Simmons. These angles were kept pretty much of a secret. While there were a few wrestlers that knew ahead of time that Simmons was winning the title, and many wrestlers who knew the title was changing in Baltimore, but some seemed to believe it was Sting that was going to get the belt, and everyone knew something big was going to happen, although exactly what was a well-kept secret. In Baltimore, supposedly neither Vader nor Simmons knew for sure about the title change until they got to the building that night. Most of the wrestlers were shocked backstage when Roberts showed up doing the angle, even though it was generally assumed Roberts was the Bad Bob on the August booking sheets, and there were some expectations that he would debut at center stage the previous Monday. Roberts wasn't backstage before the show began, and almost nobody even knew he was in the building or in town until he did the angle. Most of the talk over the past week centered around the article on the World Wrestling Federation in the Penthouse magazine that hit the newsstands last Monday. There has been a lot of reaction, both positive and negative, toward the piece. Although the issue will be on the stands for a few more weeks, it appears as far as a mainstream news story is concerned that this piece, in and of itself, isn't going to have any major aftershocks. Right now, because all sports media is overloaded because of the Olympics, nothing in pro wrestling is about to get any attention. Although there have been complaints that the story is nothing but a rehash, and much of the material was reported months back, there were several new revelations that hadn't been broken anywhere nationally in the story. As far as complaints, the story wasn't current. That is simply the nature of the beast in any article in a major magazine that has an early deadline. Although we've received no official word from the WWF regarding its reaction, unofficially we've been told the company was obviously less than thrilled and tried to dismiss the story as being a bunch of lies. Others are going to accept it as the unquestioned truth, which may be almost as unfair as those dismissing it as all lies. I've got a really unique vantage point on this story, having been in the middle of almost everything that has gone on from start to finish. I've probably talked to all the major particulars involved, most at great length. The most important lessons to be learned on this is that no matter how hideous revelations might go public, the only real long-term damage that can happen in regard to wrestling from publicity of this type will come from merchandisers dropping their involvement and television stations dropping show. While these stories may have had, in fact, probably have had, a minor effect on house show attendance and television ratings this summer, that effect is almost always going to be short-term provided all the hype mechanisms, mainly television and merchandising, stay in place. Come September, it is believed that there will be a significant drop in wrestling hours on television. We are already seeing examples of that today. You can go to any toy store and see the downplaying of displays of wrestling merchandise as compared with 6 months ago. This story has had major effects already, but mainly in indirect rather than direct ways. This isn't going to mean the collapse of anyone, at least anyone on a major scale. It is going to mean some budget downsizing in the WWF, which we are already seeing, most of which will go unnoticed to all but the most hardcore followers and the pocketbooks of the wrestlers themselves. Just as important is why this all happened. Vince McMahon set himself and his company up for this, and not even because of what was reported as much as because of his decisions on how to handle previous PR problems in a manner that destroyed the company's credibility. Anyone who thinks otherwise is trying to scapegoat the blame. It was McMahon's decision to have himself, his company spokesperson, and his leading star continually lie to both the press and the public in regard to the steroid issue. In typical wrestling short-term thinking, the lies wouldn't be damaging in the short term and would cause all the problems to go away because the press would get tired and ignore wrestling as usual. It probably seemed like the correct PR move at the time, but the long-term results of the lies were brutally damaging. What happened was, after all the lies, the company lost all credibility in anything it would say to most media outlets that covered the story. CBS Evening News seemed to be the lone exception, and their piece was hardly positive either, although a few outlets like USA Today did run puff pieces during the same time period. When the other stories broke, whether true or false, McMahon set himself up to be a sitting duck for virtually any accusations thrown his way by anyone because his responses to other issues were lies, his television performances were even more lies, and his outright denials of everything were taken to be even more lie. Some of the denials probably were dishonest, but even if there had been some truth to some of the denials, how could it be taken seriously? There was no denial he could issue and no statement he could make that would have had credibility at a time when he desperately needed credibility. This led to him being a sitting duck when several media outlets investigated. But ultimately he was saved from the greatest scrutiny by the very fact the subject matter involved pro wrestling. And so many media outlets immediately look the other way when it comes to an ugly set of stories to begin with, let alone when they involve something generally held in disrepute like pro wrestling. With all credibility gone, Titan's next step was legal bullying tactics. That had mixed results. While it may have delayed a few stories from getting out and perhaps even killed others, one of which would have probably resulted in more serious repercussions, in the case of the Penthouse story, it worked in reverse, with the result being the most nasty story imaginable. I've got pretty good knowledge as to what the author, Jeff Savage, went through from the time he started covering this story for the San Diego Union Tribune as simply what was planned to be a personality profile on Billy Graham, well before Graham had any intentions of being involved in a media war with McMahon, to what it ended up being, which was the stories breaking the original charges of ring boys being sexually abused by WWF higher-ups. The results of his and other stories led to the short-term phasing out of Hulk Hogan, which led to the worst summer on record as far as attendance and ratings, and the resignations of Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin. Given that, was Savage fair in his brutal portrayal of McMahon? If you look at things from his perspective, given what he went through doing his original stories, the lies he was told that he found out about, the legal threats and swerve tactics thrown his way, yes, he was fair in judging the character of an individual he didn't know nor never talked with in the only way he could given the behavior of that character in response to the press. It was not Savage's fault McMahon chose this response. My feeling is Savage should have made it clear that Barry Orton's allegations took place in 1978 when none of those involved worked for the WWF, and that the story about Hulk Hogan doing cocaine on an airplane took place in 1982 when he and Graham were both working in the O. However, both anecdotes are relevant to Big Story because Orton's story involved those who were major decision makers at Titan, and Hogan has been marketed in a manner that cocaine use is an issue. Aside from those minor points, I had no qualms with what was printed given his perspective. As far as reopening, so to speak, the death of Nancy Argentino and certainly trying to create the illusion that McMahon could possibly have paid people off to cover up a possible homicide, I want to make clear that nobody has gotten any concrete evidence to even be able to make that assumption. What wasn't written in the story about the Argentino death is that the family sued Snuka and was awarded a $500,000 judgment from wrongful death against him, although they never collected a cent since Snuka claimed to be destitute. The legal aspect of the Argentino death is still open. The deputy coroner was quoted as saying he thought the case should be reopened and investigated as a homicide. Savage's passage was very cleverly written to paint a very sleazy portrait of an individual and then basically ask the reader the question as do they believe this individual could have covered up a homicide. Going back in time, looking at it from any wrestling or boxing promoter's perspective or many sports owners, if their leading drawing card, which Snuka was for the WWF in 1983, had been involved in something, what lengths would they stop at to try and clear that person's name, even if they knew they were guilty? This isn't meant to single out McMahon, in fact, just the opposite. If it came to doing what Savage was trying to insinuate McMahon may have done in that situation, many others in McMahon's position would have done exactly what Savage insinuated. Look at Don King's behavior with Mike Tyson before the rape trial. We also had an attempt at a $1 million payoff to the victim before the trial to get her to drop the charges and save Tyson from having to pay the price for his crime in a strange fire set in a hotel room where the jury was staying during the trial. The fact that others in the same situation may have done the same thing and that some definitely would have is more a sad commentary about the power of money and lack of respect for our laws than any attempt at a defense of those actions. There is no defense for obstruction of justice or trying to subvert the justice system to keep a big money player in the fold. Does it happen on a regular basis involving people who have money? You have to be brutally naive to deny that. That isn't to say it happened here, but it is to say that it has happened in the past and will continue to happen in the future. The problem is, if something not kosher went on, would I believe what was hinted in the story to be something that many wrestling promoters wouldn't stoop to in order to keep their leading drawing card out of trouble? The answer to that question doesn't take a lot of soul-searching to come to the conclusion. Now that it has been several months, these different cases brought up can be looked at in a different light. They have to be examined individually. So here goes. Homosexuality in the dressing room is blatant. If you drop the soap. Billy Jack Haynes. This quote went national on Entertainment Tonight and was said in many other places. As far as homosexuality goes, the last time I checked, it wasn't a crime, so it may have been a colorful quote, but it means nothing. It's all come out in the open about the sexual persuasion of a few ex-WWF officers. But the question isn't their choice of personal behavior, but if they use their power to harass employees. You can make heterosexual and be just as guilty of the same thing, although it doesn't make as colorful copy. Hogan doing cocaine on the airplane. Billy Graham. Several sources confirmed that story to either us or others months ago, within a week or so of Graham originally making the claim on a New England radio show. I believe it to be the truth, since Graham had told me the same story months earlier at a time he had no animosity against Hogan, and didn't want to go public with anything personally involving Hogan other than saying Hogan lied on Arsenio. That attitude changed when Titan officials tried to say Graham was making up that Hogan had used steroids, and he changed his personal tune when it came to Hogan and the WWF. Source after source confirmed to the Los Angeles Times and People magazine months ago about Hogan's propensity for steroids and cocaine. I wouldn't think it was that big of a deal in one perspective because it's not like that stuff isn't rampant among sports and entertainment stars. However, when you preach a certain thing, you should be able to live up to it or shut up about it and be man enough to admit your shortcomings. The fact that Hogan lied on Arsenio, and his reaction to Savage when he was questioned about these things months ago when Savage gave him a chance to admit things and not look like such a hypocrite and he instead refused to talk to the media, makes it very hard to respect him overall, and not just in regards to this subject. Many of his friends/acquaintances have tried to convince me otherwise, but I've yet to hear a valid defense, not for Hogan using steroids because I can give plenty of valid reasons myself why he would want to do that, but for his reactions when all the news broke and instead of confronting the truth and admitting it, he basically hid and hoped it would all go away. This has all been gone into in detail months ago. Barry Orton's being propositioned while working in Amarillo in 1978. I have little doubt the story is true. McMahon's denial of that story, in fairness to him, he may have been told by Garvin that Orton was lying when he issued the denial, was another credibility blow to him since the story itself is readily acknowledged as true. In addition, McMahon's denial brought Tom Hankins forward. How that relates to the big picture is the question. I can tell you that Orton perceived it hurt his career in the WWF when Patterson, and more particularly, Garvin, were in decision-making positions. Did it overtly? Maybe not. Did it subtly? That's a debatable question. If there was another prelim wrestler who put out for management, would he have been kept at a time when there had to be a cut made instead of Orton? If Orton had put out, would it have been a positive benefit to his career? That is the real question that has to be asked, stemming from the Barry Orton story. There are many wrestlers who assume that to be the case. Orton was the first to say it. Many others have said it since, the most well-known being Paul Roma, and talked about situations that occurred with them. Was that belief simply paranoia because those in decision-making powers had a certain sexual preference and homophobia does exist in the wrestling business? Or was that belief based on reality? I can tell you as a fact from speaking to many that the belief was an honest belief. But as far as if the reality is a true reality, I can't say. Read a Chatterton story, since now it can be told aired. I've spoken with two different major wrestling personalities who were around the scene in 1986 when this alleged incident took place. Both claimed to have known Chatterton and she confided her story to both of them. One claimed she told him, shortly after the incident, details of a conversation with McMahon, and the person claimed that she never brought up a rape. The other claimed she had told him the story, and the story she told on now was the same story she told him in 1986. Supposedly at one point David Schultz was trying to set up a class action suit against McMahon and knew about Chatterton's story and contacted her, and she denied a rape story, but later she went back to Schultz, years before any of this broke publicly in early 1992, and told the story she later went public with. Stewart, the limo driver, was there and can confirm everything Chatterton said up to the point she went into the limo. From that point on, it's one person's word, Chatterton's, against another's silence, McMahon. Legally, the statute of limitations ran out years ago. In this case you can't judge truth by legality because truth has no time limitations. Murray Hodgson's story, hopefully there will come a day when the court order sealing Hodgson's deposition is lifted and we'll get a chance to see exactly what came out, and at that point it will be reported here. Until that happens, there is nothing that can be prudently said other than in rewatching the confrontation on Donahue and based on facts that I have later found out, McMahon did lie about saying it took Hodgson months to come forward, and has never offered what would be damaging evidence on Hodgson of showing Hodgson asking for the $160,000 of he'd appear on the show as he claimed on the show, and Hodgson vehemently deny. It must also be stated that the split between Hodgson and lawyer Ed Nussbaum can certainly be taken as a sign that what came out in deposition wasn't favorable to Hodgson, something Titan sources have insisted ever since the deposition. Tom Cole's story. Savage's story went into detail of Cole's complaint. The source for the complaint that was quoted was Tom Cole, not Lee Cole. Jerry McDevitt, a lawyer for Titan, claimed in a letter to the New York Times and another to Penthouse that a source, presumably Lee Cole, duped Savage and made up the story. Lee Cole denied it vehemently, but the fact is it was Tom Cole who talked to Savage. It was Tom Cole who did the video that never aired on Now It Can Be Told, and it was Tom Cole who received a settlement from Titan in exchange to agreeing not to pursue legal action. Lee Cole has gone on numerous radio shows over the past several weeks, is now estranged from his brother, and has completely disappeared since doing the Curtis and Lisa Sliva talk show in New York 10 days ago. He does have an admitted criminal background. His credibility also has been questionable at many points, but how does that explain Chris Loss, who as soon as he went public, just as suddenly went silent about the entire affair? If Loss was part of a conspiracy to make up a story organized by Lee Cole, why did he and another ex-ring boy in the Niagara Falls area tell friends the same story only in far more detail, one of whom is newsletter writer Mike Sawyer of Buffalo? And why have several others from different parts of the country come forward with similar stories? Graham injecting Hogan with testosterone at the Pontiac Silverdome. He had scar tissue on his butt from so many injections over the years, and it was hard to shove the needle in. Graham has said this on numerous occasions. McMahon tried to say Graham was lying about this on Donahue. I believe Graham. Every wrestler I spoke with on the subject who was around during that time period believed Graham was telling the truth. Graham said that the Hulk often snorted cocaine in the dressing room before matches and then would crash recklessly into his opponents in the ring. I don't know about often. I've talked to a lot of wrestlers and haven't heard a lot of first-hand stories like that, but I have heard one very specific case. Schultz said Hogan sold a potpourri of drugs throughout the 80s and was known in wrestling circles as the Tampa Pipeline. To me, this is a very relevant point. If one of the major heroes aimed at children of the 1980s was a black market drug pusher at some point in his life, if this is true, I'm not saying he should be sent to slaughter or hung in chains for it, but it is a point that needs to be made clear. A lot of people have done a lot of things when they were young and broke that they wish they hadn't done when they were older and financially well off. But they still did them and have to face up to them. When Schultz first said that on some radio shows in January, I had never heard that about Hogan previously. If there was anything originally said by Graham and Schultz that I was skeptical of, this was it. Quite frankly, if Schultz was lying, Hogan should have filed a suit against him, although I recognize the defense that a public denial or a lawsuit only brings more publicity to the charges. In this case, these charges may keep coming back to haunt him if they aren't addressed at some point. That hasn't materialized. Hogan's silence in this case is deafening. McMahon and others from Titan, and even wrestling and bodybuilding magazines, who have tried to defend Hogan's apparent steroid use by saying they were legal at the time, which, in the case of most wrestlers, including Hogan, trying to use that defense, wasn't even the case because they were illegal in Florida and California years before the federal law changed in 1991. Need to get the truth out in this question. Clearly, being a drug pusher hasn't been legal in any state during any of our lifetimes. Other wrestlers have since said that Hogan's drug abuse is rampant. Savage brought up Billy Jack Haynes' story about Hogan popping pills and smoking pot while driving 80 miles per hour home. Bruno Sammartino called Hogan a walking pharmacy, but it's not just confined to him. Wrestling is filth now, just utter garbage. Drugs are everywhere. Hey, this business had major drug problems for years. It's the nature of the beast. The demands of the business both physically and from a schedule standpoint make drug use a reality. To deny this is to not understand what wrestlers do in the ring, their overall lifestyle, and what they have to do to make their schedule. It's not meant as a knock on any aspect of the business, just an acceptance of the reality. In fairness to Hogan, this needs to be pointed out. While Sammartino has been criticized as simply being jealous of the fame Hogan has received, is that statement about Hogan either untrue or even unfair? The 1984 Hulk Hogan that got over nationally looked like a walking pharmacy. It's not, nor has anything ever been confined to him. While there are wrestlers who don't use the situations that have created this environment, the demand for size and physique, the road schedule, haven't changed. The only change has been drug testing. You motherfuckers all tested black again. That's it, goddammit. I've had enough. I'm not covering for you anymore. The story claimed McMahon was less than forthright in overseeing his drug program. One wrestler told Savage that McMahon screamed this at a team meeting during a television taping in Amarillo this past January. I've talked with two other wrestlers who confirmed such a meeting took place behind closed doors and McMahon was upset about the Marty Jannetty situation which had just taken place days earlier. Neither recalled McMahon saying anything that would indicate that he was admitting covering up positive tests. Jim Stewart told Savage that one of the WWF's biggest names routinely tested positive for cocaine without any repercussions. Stories of jobbers known to be clean peeing in test cups for Hogan and 2 or 3 other major stars have been told oftentimes and by many. Those critical of the WWF drug programs have long said McMahon would simply cover up most of the positives and use the negatives to punish someone out of favor. The way the steroid program was handled from the beginning seems to have created a lot more questions than answers. It was a full 9 months after McMahon telling the public that the WWF symbol stands for drug-free sports entertainment before there was any significant drop in steroid use. However, now 1 year later, the drop in use has been significant. But has it been eliminated? Allegations persist that the very same wrestler Stewart told Savage McMahon routinely covered for on positive tests still has a free pass. It would take an entire issue to go into the various outright lies, distortions, and changing stories I've went through in covering that subject. A bodybuilding newsletter called Muscle Beach Newsletter stated this in its June issue regarding the WBF and drug testing. I guess most of you haven't heard yet, but Vince pulled a surprise test on all his athletes 6 weeks ago and 10 of them tested positive. In Gary Stridham's own words, he received a call from the WBF at 12:30 at night to come down to Gold's for a photo session. There were no cameras waiting, only WBF stooges with piss beakers and blood-drawing syringes. A clear case of entrapment. He was positive. It appears the others were entrapped under similar circumstances. Those who tested positive have not seen any WBF paychecks these last 6 weeks. Word has it they were to be retested before the show, but I don't know at this point if they were, or if so, what the results were. If this passage is true, it is saying that 10 of the 12 competitors in the WBF drug-free contest had failed a steroid test just 6 weeks earlier. According to the WBF drug testing bylaws, all bodybuilders were to have been given their first steroid test during the last week in February. This test was a freebie and that failure resulted in no disciplinary action. The second test was scheduled for the last week in March. In that test, the levels of steroids had to decrease from the first test or it was considered a positive, which would result in a 6-week suspension of pay. This was the same procedure that many WWF wrestlers reportedly beat the tests for months on by slightly decreasing dosages, even though Dr. Bob Goldman, who administers drug tests for the IFBB and NPC, and Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, who now heads McMahon's own drug program, both told us that there is no way through current testing procedures to accurately gauge whether the athletes had decreased dosages. Perhaps that explains why the first actual steroid suspensions for wrestlers from a program that initiated in July of 1991 didn't occur until Di Pasquale came aboard in May of 1992, despite widespread talk within the profession that use remained significant during that period. If the story is correct, the tests would have had to have involved Di Pasquale because they were testing both blood and urine. All other sports federations test only urine, although Olympic doctors have stated that our technology for testing blood at this point isn't accurate enough to use it as a criterion for testing for steroid. McMahon himself talked about the athletes as drug-free about 22,000 times during the pay-per-view broadcast and emphasized it during all pre-show hype. Technically, there still may be an out in his program for him putting guys on stage as drug-free even if 80% had failed steroid tests. If the story is true, Titan rules state a 6-week suspension, and if the bodybuilders didn't get paid for 6 weeks, that would be a suspension. If the testing was done 6 weeks and 1 day before the contest, the article stated 6 weeks before but it easily could have been off by a day or two, then they would have served their suspension and been eligible for the contest. Since the next test wasn't scheduled until the day of the event, obviously nobody would even get results until at least a week later. In other words, maybe there was no danger of anyone missing the contest, whether they used steroids indiscriminately or not, even in this supposed drug-tested and drug-free contest. But if 83% failed a drug test and the contest was advertised as being drug-free over and over and to death says all that needs to be said about credibility on this subject. If that is the case here, this is hardly the only sport where it is the case. I'm sure you'll find plenty of evidence in track and baseball, among others, that is similar. Calling bodybuilding at that level or any level for that matter, drug-free is an oxymoron to begin with. One top draw who has wrestled Hogan was spotted a week before a recent show squeezing urine from a Visine bottle into his testing cup. WWF execs frowned but looked away. This apparently was in reference to Sid Audi. Audi was, in fact, suspended. The funny thing was, he had already quit before he was suspended. This statement was probably unfair in that the person who allegedly did that was suspended, even if the suspension was delayed about 3 weeks. McMahon would be doing drugs in the back of the limo, and I began to complain about it. I'd say, Vince, I don't think that's a good idea while we're driving, and he'd say, that's not your affair, that's mine. Stewart says McMahon was apathetic regarding the law and he recalls an instance of particular recklessness when McMahon ordered him to drive 100 miles per hour from New York City to Hershey, Pennsylvania. It was wintertime and cold outside and we're later for a show and the speedometer needle is bent all the way, and he's yelling at me to go faster. He's back there with a couple of friends, and they're drinking and doing coke and laughing. Finally I say, Vince, do you really think this is smart? What if we get pulled over? And he says, I'll handle that when it comes. I'll get out of it. And that's how he is. He doesn't stop at stop signs or red lights. He says, drive through that light. He doesn't think those lights are for him. They're for somebody else. I've got no comment one way or another on this since the first I'd heard of these stories were reading them in the magazine. Tom Hankins' story. Hankins wrote a letter to this newsletter just after Barry Orton went public because he was so infuriated with McMahon saying that Orton was a liar. He told the story of him drinking with Pat Patterson and asking him for a shot at doing television jobs and saying Patterson said his chances were slim and none, but there was one way. Hankins didn't come out of nowhere with the story. A good friend of mine knew the story well. He'd heard it years ago. I don't think there is any question the incident took place pretty much as Hankins described it. The friend of mine said he believed Patterson was kidding in that situation. I talked with Hankins later and he said Patterson was serious. Hankins said that he called the WWF when it happened and McMahon never returned his call. Logically, in that time period, if Vince McMahon received a phone call from an unknown wrestler, the odds are tremendous that he would not have called that person back. So that is believable. If Hankins claimed he called the WWF to tell his story, I believe him. If McMahon claims he never heard the story from Hankins, I believe him also. Lord Littlebrook's story. Littlebrook claimed he wrote a letter to McMahon 4 years ago complaining that the midgets were dropped because one of them complained about a homosexual past from a WWF executive. Littlebrook has said the story numerous times, but doesn't have a copy of the letter. He was pretty adamant and I can't believe he'd make up a story like this. I don't believe that's why the WWF hasn't used midgets since. The dropping of midgets coincided with the bushwhackers being brought in and doing the comedy routines that midgets were previously used for. If Littlebrook wrote the letter, it does ruin McMahon's credibility in saying that nobody had ever contacted him previously. He told me more than once that in 30 years in the wrestling business, nobody had ever even made a complaint or an allegation against Pat Patterson. Another statement that has no credibility. Bruno Sammartino's story about Mel Phillips performing a sexual act on an 11-year-old boy. Bruno told the story on Larry King and it was brought up on Donahue. Sammartino hates Vince McMahon. And vice versa is probably true as well. Having been in a relatively small room with both, I can say that this no work and if anything, an understatement. Would he make up a story like this because he hates McMahon so much? Not a chance. Mike Clark's story, I didn't get into personal stuff on the show, but I have a story of my own. Clark goes on to talk about being propositioned by Garvin and being made promises for full-time work, but when he turned Garvin down, was shortly thereafter fired. Clark's story and Tom Cole's story were eerily similar. Since the two didn't know one another, the very similar accounts are quite interesting. Saved by the bell. Actually by the confusion. There is so much out there, some of which is very credible but maybe or maybe not relevant, some of which is credible and relevant and some of which is not even credible. It adds up to confusion and a tiresome process of trying to ascertain the truth in a sea of deceit. It gets old, people get tired of the story, and it just filters away. But it seemingly keeps coming back. The main news of the past week in the real world is of course the Olympic Games. A few notes as they relate to pro wrestling. In the unlimited weight class in women's judo, Svetlana Gordeniko of the unified team, who was a pre-Olympics silver medalist favorite, didn't place after going 2-2 in competition. Gordeniko has worked as a woman wrestler for FMW in Japan. Dennis Kozlowski, who won a silver medal in Greco-Roman wrestling at 220, is the brother of Dwayne Kozlowski, who represented the U.S. in Greco in the 1988 Olympics and didn't place. Dwayne Kozlowski wrestles for UWFI in Japan. As expected, Alexander Karelin of the unified team breezed to the gold in Greco in the 286 weight class. Karelin, considered by most everyone as the greatest heavyweight Greco-Roman wrestler of all time, destroyed everyone in his path. He's been the subject of negotiations with New Japan and even did an exhibition last summer at a sumo hall show. David Gobjashvili, unified team freestyle wrestler at 286, who won the gold in 1988 and was a medal favorite this year, had not started competition as of press time. There's even more indication that the WBF is about to be no more. At the videotape convention in Las Vegas this past week, the Coliseum display contained no talk, no packages, no bodybuilders, no nothing indicating a sign of life from the WBF. Coliseum had several WWF stars including Warrior, Undertaker, and Duggan. Lines for Warrior were much shorter than in years past while there was no interest in Duggan. The Turner booth had some wrestling stuff but little of it was visible. They sent Missy Hyatt and Johnny B. Bad although there was no publicity for their appearance. Herb Abrams also had a booth and sent Paul Orndorff, who had real strong lines to see him, Steve Ray and Steve Williams. The Southern California WWA promoters, who ran the successful Lucha Libre shows at Cal State Los Angeles Gym, seemingly are done with working with AAA in Mexico City. The AAA television taping on July 4th, which is a television show, was a nightmare when it came to production values, was an incredible box office success, drawing 6,500 fans and $120,000, which is the second largest non-WWF gate in mat history in California and by far the largest gate ever drawn by a foreign-based wrestling promotion ever in the USOF. The follow-up show on July 26th at the Hollywood Palladium saw all three AAA-based wrestlers imported as the drawing cards for the show, Helio del Santo, Pero Aguayo, and Coronel Barbaro, all no-show. This caused so many refunds that the gate, which would have been around $45,000 for the expected sellout, materialized at $8,000, and the local promoters took a major financial bath. Talk this week is that the local promoters are negotiating with both EMLL and UWA in Mexico City to use those organizations to supply headline talent for future shows. No deal has been reached. Even though most who watch all the Mexican television will say that EMLL is the best of the three promotions, AAA would still have the advantage drawing locally because it has television in Los Angeles, EMLL doesn't. Plus, of the 6 biggest drawing cards in Mexico today, AAA has 4 of them: Cana, Octagon, Santo, and Aguayo. The other 2 are Atlantis, who unlike Conan and Santo has no history of being able to draw in Los Angeles, and Canadian Vampire Casanova, who isn't even Mexican although he's a huge draw in Mexico City. The promoters also contacted Mil Mascaras, who does have a history of drawing in Los Angeles, but Mascaras, who probably would only draw on a first time in for nostalgia rather than consistently, asked for a whopping $3,000 guarantee plus 5% of the house, so don't expect him. For those reasons, even though Cmll may provide as good a product, I doubt it would have the potential to do the gates the AAA show did. There is no date official for a returned CSLA card, but to be able to pull it off without television would require a more organized promotion that has been the case thus far, because you'd need to shoot angles leading from show to show, which requires knowledge of the lineup weeks in advance rather than one day in advance, which hasn't been the case so far. All Japan. The current tour ended on July 31st in Matsudo before a sellout 3,600 fans, with Stan Hansen retaining the Triple Crown, pinning Akira Tao after 3 lariats in 14:41. The rest of the final night saw Mitsuharu Misawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi beat Yoshinari Ogawa and Masafuchi when Misawa made Ogawa submit to the facelock. Kenta Kobashi and the Patriot beat Giant Kimala and Abdullah the Butcher. Toshiaki Kawada pinned Richard Slinger. Sonny Beach and Johnny Ace beat Billy Black and Barry Horowitz. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura beat Haruka Eigen and Motoshi Okuma. Chris and Mark Youngblood beat Ryuma Izumida and Mighty Inoue. The Destroyer beat Satoru Asako with the figure 4 leg lock, and Mitsuo Momota pinned Masao Inoue. Overall, this was a pretty uneventful tour, with most of the house shows taking place in smaller buildings, and Jumbo Tsuruta missing the tour. Tsuruta is not being advertised as appearing on the next tour as well, so I guess his knee injury was pretty serious. While the group has continued to sell out and produce excellent main events, the loss of Tsuruta has made the sameness on top even more noticeable. One side always has Ogawa, Tao and Fuji either in 6-mans or broken up into a singles match and a tag against the big guns, either American or the younger quartet of Misawa, Kawara, Kobashi and Kikuchi, who really the entire promotion revolves around. Things were worse since Misawa was injured pretty bad. He actually worked matches with his arm in a sling, but only missed a few dates because the promotion didn't want both Misawa and Tsuruta missing house dates. On the July 21st Bruiser Brody Memorial card in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100, they had Kikuchi and Kobashi and Misawa against Fuji and Ogawa and Tao, which went 19 minutes before Kawada came to ringside and threw in the towel because of Misawa's shoulder injury, since Misawa continually refused to submit. Kawada said he wanted the match to continue with himself replacing the injured Misawa. It went another 12 minutes with Tao's trio winning again when Ogawa pinned Kikuchi with a back suplex. Also, Hansen and Ace beat Patriot and Beach. Kawada made Black submit to the stretch plum. Abdullah and Kimala pinned Youngbloods. Baba and Kimura beat Eigen and Okuma. Horowitz and Slinger beat Asako and Mighty Inoue, and Destroyer made Masao Inoue submit to the figure 4. With Tsuruta out, combined with his already being scheduled for a Triple Crown match at the end of the tour, Tao was given a super push all month. It's ironic, since of all the young lions, Tao is clearly both the worst worker of the bunch, not that he's bad, but the other 5 are all amongst the best in the world right now, but also the least over. July 29th in Osaka drew a sellout 3,300 as Tao and Fuji and Ogawa beat Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi when Tao pinned Kikuchi in 26:46. Hansen and Ace beat Youngbloods. Kobashi pinned Horowitz. Abdullah and Kimala beat Beach and Patria. Slinger and Black beat Izumida and Mighty Inoue, and Baba and Kimura beat Eigen and Okuma. July 28th in Ishikawa drew a sellout 4,300 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tao and Fuji and Ogawa in 27:47. Kobashi pinned Fuji with a moonsault. Hansen pinned Patriot in a non-title match. Kikuchi pinned Horowitz. Abdullah and Kimala beat Beach and A. Youngbloods beat Slinger and Mighty Inoue. Black pinned Izumida and Baba, and Kimura beat Okuma and Eigen. July 30th in Shimizu saw Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Ogawa and Fuji and Tao in 22:09 when Kawada made Ogawa submit. Ace and Hansen beat Patriot and Horowitz. Abdullah and Kimala beat Youngbloods. Slinger and Black beat Kikuchi and Mighty Inoue, and Beach pinned Izumide. Next tour doesn't start until August 20th. This past Saturday afternoon, Nippon TV broadcasted another All Japan's Greatest Hits television special with Mil Mascaras vs. Tsuruta, 1977, Terry and Dory Funk vs. Hansen and Gordy, 1983, and Baba vs. Fritz von Erich, 1975. New Japan. The July tour ended with a major show on July 31st in Sapporo, which drew 6,500 fans and approximately $300,000, headlined by Riki Choshu retaining his IWGP title, pinning Super Strong Machine in 11:43, plus Hiroshi Hashi and Shinya Hashimoto beat Tatsumi Fujinami and Kensuke Sasaki when Hashimoto pinned Sasaki in 20:47. Bam Bam Bigelow beat Masa Saito via DQ. New Japan virtually never does DQ endings, but Bigelow and Masa Saito are doing a total American feud with juice, few big moves, and no finishes, and each interfering in the other's house show matches. which also rarely occurs in Japan. Masa Chono pinned the returning Shiro Koshinaka. Keiji Muto pinned TNT. Thought Norton and Tony Halme beat the Untouchables. From Windy City Wrestling, Jushin Liger and Takayuki Iizuka and Samurai beat Tatsutoshi Gogo and Norio Oniga and Hiro Saito. Weird to see Liger and Samurai on the same team since they are feuding. Black Cat pinned Hiroyoshi Yamamoto and Koji Kanemoto pinned Satoshi Kojima. The new tour begins with the NWA tournament from August 6 to August 12. July 24th television show did a 4.9 and 5.4 rating, which is below par. July 29th in Abetsu drew 2,160 as Muto and Chono and Sasaki beat TNT and Norton and Bigelow when Muto pinned TNT. Chashu and Fujinami beat Machine and Goto. Halme and Masanobu Kurisu upset Masa Saito and Hashimoto when Bigelow interfered, causing Saito to get pinned. Liger and Hazi beat Samurai and Iizuka. Untouchables beat Kengo Kimura and Yamamoto and Oniga, and Hiro Saito beat Kojima and Kanemoto. July 21st in Akita before a sellout 3,390 saw Machine and Bigelow and Halme beat Chashu and Masa Saito and Fujinami when Machine pinned Saito, Machine being put over because of his title shot. Norton and TNT beat Muto and Kimura. Chono and Hashimoto beat Iizuka and Samur. Brad Armstrong and Hiro Saito beat Liger and Hazi when Armstrong pinned Liger, so before Armstrong was injured, he was being pushed for an eventual singles match with Liger. Goto and Oniga beat Kanemoto and Sasaki. Untouchables beat Kido and Kat and prelims. July 28th in Asahikawa drew 2,150 as Machine and Halme and Bigelow beat Muto and Masa Saito and Chashu and Bigelow pinned Muto. Hashimoto and Fujinami beat Untouchables. Chono and Masa Saito beat Norton and TNT. Iizuka and Osamu Kido beat Hazi and Kantaro Hoshin. Oniga and Goto beat Liger and Sasaki, and Samurai pinned Hiro Saito. Brad Armstrong was sent home from the tour a week early as he blew out his knee during a six-man tag main event. Other Japan notes. The most talked about show of the past week was Wing's biggest promotion thus far on August 2nd in Funabashi in an outdoor setting, which drew a full house of 5,319 fans for a ring surrounded by fire match with Mr. Pogo facing Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. Matsunaga won the match, and after the match, manager Victor Quinones turned on Pogo, who is now turning babyface. In other results, New Wing World Tag Team Champions the Headhunters kept the belts, beating Iceman, Ricky Santana, and the Winger, a rookie named Okano who had been training with the Malenkos in Florida. Jason the Terrible beat Leatherface in a loser gets stuffed in a coffin match. Seiki Hasegawa and Kyoko Inoue of All Japan Women beat Akira Hokudo and Atsuko meet. Mitsutaru Tokuda and Yukihide Kanemura won a barbed wire hair versus mask match over the Inferno and Super Invader. However, Inferno, who lost, instead of unmasking, cut Kanemura's hair. FMW on August 2nd in Sakai drew a sellout 2,334 as Atsushi Onita and Ricky Fuji beat Horace Boulder and Big Titan in a street fight. The Sheik and Sabu beat Great Punk and Tarzan Goto in 346, and Tiger Jeet Singh beat Samba Asak. Sheik missed several dates because of injuries, which happens to those who are 68 and still trying to work, even if the matches usually go less than 1 minute. August 1st in Nara drew a sellout 2,052 as Onita and Asako beat Boulder and Gladiator. Mike Alfonso, Sabu and Singh beat Fuji and Goto, and Titan beat Eiji Ezeki. Heavyweight boxer Tommy Morrison will be replaced by Maurice Smith, World Karate Association heavyweight champion, in a mixed match against Masakatsu Funaki on the 10/4 PWF card at the Tokyo Dome. Morrison is recovering from a broken jaw and being groomed for a heavyweight boxing fight in December against George Foreman, so Top Rank doesn't want him taking any chances. Oriental Pro Wrestling drew less than 1,000 in Hashoye near Tokyo on August 2nd as Ronan and Don Harris beat Koreans Kim and Lee. Ryumogo beat Sumito the Samoan. Masahiko Takasugi pinned Carl Pope, and Mike Winner pinned Hiroshi Itakura. Oriental's debut show on July 26th in Kotohira drew an announced 3,700. From photos as looked nowhere close, as Sumito and Harris brothers beat Go and Bar, and Takasugi and Itakura made Winner submit. UWFI on August 14th in Sapporo has Gary Albright vs TBA, Nobuhiko Takada and Mark Fleming vs Kazuo Yamazaki and Mark Silver, Kiyoshi Tamura vs Ray Lloyd, an indie worker from the Atlanta area, and Tatsuo Nakano and Tom Burton vs Yuko Miyato and Masahito Kakihara. An Albright vs Takada rematch for the UWFI title takes place September 21st in Osaka. WoW Channel, Japan's equivalent of HBO, has a 2-hour special on Hulk Hogan airing August 8th. PWF on July 27th in Fukuoka drew 2,520 as Masakatsu Funaki beat Bart Bale via decision after they had gone 30 minutes in a non-title match. Minoru Suzuki made Dwayne Kozlowski submit. Wayne Shamrock made Jerry Flynn submit. Yoshiaki Fujiwara made Jumbo Beretta submit and prelim. JWP reportedly drew 5,300 fans, highly suspicious, On July 25th in Nagoya with Devil Masami and Mayumi Ozaki beating Dynamite Kansai and Cutie Suzuki. TV Asahi New Japan's network taped that card for television so they could have just papered the place like crazy because of TV cameras. FMW Tour starts August 22nd at Korakuen Hall with Gladiator, Titan Dr. Lucer, Sabu, Amigo Ultra and the Mercenaries, Bill Anderson and Louis Spiccoli. War changed its August 13th Korakuen Hall card due to Ashurahara being in the hospital, so the new main event is Genichiro Tenryu vs Masao Orihara, plus Kabuki vs Takashi Ishikawa, Ultimate Dragon vs Commando Russo and Samson Fuyuki vs Tatsumi Kitahara. July 29th in Kanagawa drew 2,900 as Harris Brothers beat Jesse Barr and Ryuma Go, Takasugi beat Samito, Irakura pinned Winner and Lee pinned Pope. July 29th in Matsuyama drew a sellout 4,051 as Gladiator and Titan and Singh beat Onita and Goto and Asako, Boulder pinned Fuji and Sabu pinned Ezeki. The reason they drew such a big crowd is it was the first time Onita and Singh went head-to-head in the ring since the Jungle match. Pat Tanaka is coming in for Universal on August 15th as a tag team partner of Bulldog KT in the tournament to crown the new UWA Intercontinental Tag Team Champions. July 31st in Takamatsu drew a sellout 3,021 as a barbed wire street fight death match saw Onita and Asako beat Boulder and Sabu, Gladiator and Singh beat Fuji and Goto and Titan pinned Punk. July 28th in Cure drew 2,217 as Onita and Asako beat Gladiator and Boulder in a street fight, Titan and Sabu beat Goto and Mr. Ganasuke, Singh pinned Punk and Fuji pinned Ezeki. July 30th in Kochi saw Onita and Punk beat Gladiator and Sabu, Titan and Boulder beat Fuji and Goto and Singh beat Asako. All Japan Women had a television taping on July 30th in Mito with a major upset as Akira Hokudo won a cage match from Bull Nakano in 1816. Also Asia Kong and Koro Ito beat Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada in 21:58, plus in first-round matches in the Fuji Television Network Tag Team Tournament, Manami Toyota and Mima Shimoda beat Bat Yoshinaga and Tomoko Watanabe and Mariko Yoshida, and Seiki Hasegawa beat Etsuko Mita and Takako Ino. August 1st in Karatsuke saw Hokudo and Mita beat Kong and Hasegawa, Toyota pinned Shimoda, Kyoko Inoue pinned Terry Power and Cynthia Moreno pinned Miori Kamiya. The July 15th Ota Ward Gymnasium Night of the Champions show already aired on television, drawing a 1.5 rating in a post-midnight Monday night time slot, and all of the high-paced nightly non-stop action seems to be taking its toll on everyone at once. Debbie Malenko seemed to have injured her knee in a Japanese tag title match where Yoshida and Takako Inoue kept the belts, beating Malenko and Mima Shimoda. Then Yoshida's shoulder went out, she worked 2 straight matches, and she was bleeding badly from the mouth when she lost the Japanese singles title to Hasegawa. Both of these matches were excellent. Kyoko Inoue kept the All-Pacific title beating Power in a 2.5 stars match. Power is better than Malenko was when she first came in, but is still nowhere close to the level of worker as any of the Japanese, although she can show a decent amount of personality. Next was Hokudo vs Nakano for the CMLL title, and they were clearly building for a long match, but Hokudo's knee went out and they had to stop the match because she was literally crying in the ring. She still was back working a few days later. Hokudo is amazing because of all the injuries she's suffered in the ring, including a broken neck during the second fall of a 3-fall match where she still did all of her planned high spots in the third falls many years ago. But this was the first time she's ever broken down in pain in the ring. Main event of Toyota and Yamada beating Kong and Kyoko Inoue in 2/3 falls was the expected super fantastic 4.5 stars match, although Toyota's ribs were injured in the first fall and she nearly fell off the ropes trying the Asai moonsault off the top rope to the floor, which would have maimed. Yumiko Hara and Suzuka Minami returned from Mexico for the August 30th Korakuen Hall show. Japanese television rundown. June 27th, All Japan. 1. Jumbo Tsuruta and Tao retained the PWF World Tag Team titles, beating Masawa and Kobashi in 27 minutes from Budokan Hall. Basically the entire television show consisted of this match. It was about what you'd expect from these 4 except turned up about 2 notches because it was Budokan. Masawa in particular did a lot more than he usually does. Between great moves, great selling, great psychology and great crowd heat, this was very close to a perfect match. The crowd was going nuts for the last several minutes and they went back and forth with one hot move and near fall after another. The Great went crazy as Kobashi kicked out of normal winning moves until he was finally pinned after 2 of Tao's golden arm bombers. 4 3/4 stars. July 11th, New Japan. 1. Norton and Big Van Vader beat the Wild Samoans, Samu and Kokina, in 8-12. Kind of a unique battle of the giants with 4 300-plus-pound foreign monsters against one another. Kokina dwarfed everyone, including Vader, when it came to girth. It looked to be very close to the 480 to 500-pound mark. They worked decent spots together and the crowd seemed intrigued and into everything. Match was watchable, although when Kokina did high spots, he moves very slow as you'd expect. Finish saw Semu on the top rope, but he was thrown off the top onto Kokina. Vader clotheslined Kokina, then Norton did and Norton got the pin. 2.5 stars. 2. Pegasus Kid Chris Benoit pinned IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion El Samurai Osamu Matsuda in 1506 in a non-title match to earn Kid a title shot in August. Fast-paced, excellent match. As far as versatility, Kid is probably the best non-Japanese worker in the world right now. Who else can work lucha, Japanese, American and European styles, and is one of the 2 or 3 best foreigners at lucha, as good as any foreigner at Japanese and the best foreigner at European? He was incredible here. Typical finish going back and forth with near falls. Finish saw Samurai miss a senton, splash off the top rope where you land back first onto the prone foe, off the top rope, and Kid pinned him with a backwards superplex while standing on the top rope. Really impressive to see them put on a match of this quality with no topes. Out of the ring lucha dives, 4 stars. 3. Hazi and Muto and Hashimoto beat Chashu and Iizuka and Sasaki in 2030. This was the first time this year that New Japan was pretty much able to duplicate the super successful All Japan 6-man main event format. Excellent bout from start to finish, combining all aspects of wrestling. Sasaki sold his injured ankle early. Iizuka bled a lot and Hazi kept biting the cut. And he's an ex-college professor? Iizuka made a big comeback but was cut off when Hashimoto hit him with a spinning mule kick and Hazi pinned Iizuka with a Northern Lights suplex. 4.5 stars. July 18, New Japan. 1. Muto pinned Iizuka in 1858. Muto controlled him on the mat early. He did a handspring elbow both in the ring and another on the floor. Muto was cut off when he missed a moonsault and Iizuka put him in a Samba knee submission move. Iizuka did a lot of hot moves and had Muto in trouble, looking like it would be the upset. After a Soviet suplex, Muto barely got his foot on the ropes before the 3-ala flare. With Muto looking like the end was near, as a desperation move he reversed a Soviet judo suplex, the move Hazi used on the Steiners at the Tokyo Dome show, into a dragon suplex. Full Nelson taken over into a German suplex, and got the pin with the moonsault. Great bout. 3 3/4 stars. 2. Hazi pinned Sasaki in 1706. First half of the match was slow with Sasaki controlling his former tag partner on the mat. Sasaki took over in the second half and did one big move after another on Hazi but never went for the pin and instead kept going for more big moves. After a series of Soviet suplexes and Buzz Sawyer-style power slams, Hazi reversed a move, hit a dragon suplex and got the pin. Hazi was laid out in the ring after winning. 3.5 stars. 3. Fujinami beat Richard Byrne in a gimmicked wrestler versus karate match. Fujinami has dropped some weight doing his boxing training. As a mixed match, this wasn't good because mixed matches in Japan are supposed to look like shoots and this was an obvious work. Fans didn't like it at all and were booing the work spots. Byrne pulled his punches badly and moved slow, and fans know the difference because they see UWFI in rings. They did a lot of stalling with Byrne first taking off his gloves. Bout started with him wearing gloves and Fujinami without, then they stalled several minutes until he put them on, but they made Fujinami put gloves on as well. They even rolled out of the ring with Byrne selling like a wrestler. He's a northeastern indie wrestler, although I believe the karate gimmick is legit as he runs a karate gym as his regular business. That wasn't bad. They brawled on the floor until Byrne went for a big kick, Fujinami moved and he kicked the ring post. Fujinami threw him in and made him submit in 43 of the 5th round with an Achilles tendon submission. 1 star. July 19, All Japan. 1. Tao and Fuji beat Kawara and Kikuchi. This was their typical great match. Kikuchi was destroyed most of the way and nobody takes more punishment than he does. Crowd went nuts as he kicked out of big moves. The story here was Tao kicked out of Kawada's power bomb but Kawada kicked out of the golden arm bomber. The finish was a surprise since Kawada did the job for Tao when everyone knew it would be Kikuchi. But for a shock finish, there wasn't that big of a pop. Kawada was a slight bit off normal form here. 3.5 stars. 2. Hansen pinned Kobashi in just over 20 minutes of a non-title match. Before the match started, they aired footage from several of the previous singles matches between the two. Hansen has beaten him by pinfall in every meeting, to set the stage for the upset that didn't occur. That's pretty much how Hansen as champ is working, in that they build it up so that this will be the time the young guy finally beats Stan. And the whole match goes in that direction until Stan pulls it out with a lariat out of nowhere. In that way, Hansen has probably been the best working world champion in the business in 1992. Anyway, this match was typical. Kobashi held a headlock on Hansen for 6 minutes. Then Stan just beat up Kobashi, including bouncing a chair off his back. Stan hits him so hard you can't believe it, the chair bounces several feet off his back. I just don't see how Kobashi, Kawara, Misawa and Kikuchi can last working these kind of matches so often, twice. Hansen even did 2 Cactus Jacks elbows off the apron onto Kobashi. Hansen missed a football tackle and went to the floor. Kobashi gave him a flying tackle off the apron, picked up the protective mats, and DDT'd Hansen on the floor. Kobashi then took control with sleepers and near falls, and Stan was barely hanging on, climaxing when Hansen kicked out of the moonsault. Crowd sensed the upset, but obviously that's a few years away. Hansen hit the lariat out of nowhere and got the pin. Psychology was excellent, but match was slow in spots. 3.5 stars. July 25th, New Japan. 1. Masa Saito double disqualification with Bigelow in 9:01. Saito turned 50 on Friday and he's still a first-class wrestler. Maybe the most underrated wrestler in the modern era of this business if you consider how long he's been a great worker. His physique looks amazing for his age, the best it has in years, although that appears to be largely chemical. Bigelow looks to be around 430 as he's put on a lot of weight. They brawled back and forth with both men juicing and knocking down ref Masao Tiger Hattori with a double DQ. It was a decent brawl, but the fans hated the finish. 2 stars. 2. Norton and Halme beat Sasaki and Hashimoto in 11:31. Halme looked better than he has in the past, working boxing combination spots with Hashimoto that were okay. Norton has improved a lot, but gets by because he's so aggressive in the ring. Halme eventually showed his lack of experience. Finish was Norton pinning Sasaki with a power slam. 2 stars. 3. Choshu and Fujinami and Kimura beat Hazi and Muto and Chono in 13:19. They billed this match as now leaders versus new leaders after the famous 1987 New Japan feud. In that feud, Choshu, Fujinami and Kimura were the new leaders, but in this match they were the now leaders. Basically it's the established veterans against the new stars. This match wasn't good, surprising considering who is involved, since the top rope broke about 10 minutes in and they hadn't even started building the heat, and went right to the finish with Fujinami pinning Muto with a German suplex. 2 stars. July 27th, All Japan. 1. Kawara and Kikuchi beat Fuji and Ogawa. In the early portion, Fuji used a lot of old-style holds that you never see in working over Kawara's wrist and shoulder. Kikuchi tagged in and soon was taking his typical ungodly amount of punishment. The crowd was into this match a lot, particularly when Kikuchi started the comeback. It turned into a great match with the crowd into all the near falls and Kawara finally making Ogawa submit to the stretch plum. Combination abdominal stretch and crossface, 3.5 stars. 2. Baba and Tao beat Black and Patriot. Baba tried and wasn't in much, so the match wasn't too bad. Tao pinned Black with a golden arm bomber. 1.75 stars. 3. Hansen and Ace beat Misawa and Kobashi. Excellent match with super heat from start to finish. Ace and Kobashi were in most of the way early. Ace has improved a lot and works well with Kobashi since they were a former tag team. Hansen bounced the chair off Kobashi's back twice. All the near falls at the end, and Hansen looked in trouble when Misawa used the facelock several times, but Hansen always escaped. Misawa was setting Hansen up for the Tiger Driver, but Ace came off the top rope with a clothesline. The two gave Misawa a stuffed powerbomb. Kobashi had been backdropped over the top rope to the floor, but he kicked out. However, Hansen then got the pin with a lariat. Another surprise finish, since one would expect Ace or Kobashi to have done the job. 4 stars. USWA. July 27th in Memphis drew 2,500 fans paid and a $14,000 house, which is the largest house I can recall since they did the USWA singles title tournament in 1990 that Terry Funk won. Aside from the fact that the television has been consistently great in recent weeks with various angles, probably the main reason for the house was the reuniting of the Rock and Roll Express. Complete results saw Tony Falk pin Larry Williams, Tony Anthony pin the Hornet in a babyface match, Billy Joe Travis and Miss Texas beat Lauren Davenport and Mike Miller, Robert Fuller and Dutch Mantell beat the Fabulous Fargos, Pat Rose and Tommy Seabolt, as Don and Jackie Fargo Jr., by the way, are already gone from the area. Ref Frank Morrell beat Richard Lee via DQ when the Moondogs attacked Morrell. Tom Pritchard regained the Southern title, pinning Brian Christopher with a small package after a ref bump, and the ref missed Christopher, having Pritchard pinned twice. Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, went to a double countout with Eddie and Doug Gilbert when they brawled to the back. Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett retained the USWA tag team titles, beating the Moondogs when Cujo tired to hit Jarrett with a road sign. Jarrett ducked and Spot was hit and pinned. The belts were up against the hair of Richard Lee. and Eddie Marlin shaved Lee's head after the match. Finale saw Fuller win a 20-man pole battle royal with a check on top of the pole by eliminating both Moondogs, but after the match both dogs beat him up. Lee came on television with a wig on but claimed it was his real hair because he got a hair-growing potion from Moondog Fifi. Woman wrestler Diane von Hoffman dressed up as a female Moondog. They then asked for another tag title match for August 3rd in Memphis, but this time Fifi put her hair up to get a shot at the belts. They shaved a woman's hair off maybe 15 years ago when Lawler was feuding with Bill Dundee when Lawler was a heel and Dundee put up his wife's, now ex, hair and they shaved it. Many years later Lawler put his wife's hair up in a match with Dundee but Lawler naturally won that one. Interesting that Smoky Mountain heels Pritchard, Anthony, Fuller and Mantell all work as faces here. Apparently no market carries both television shows so most fans don't know any of this. On television, Mike Samples, who did a great job in his Vince McMahon role before but since giving up the gimmick and wrestling hasn't done nearly so well, and Christopher beat Travis and Hornet, Ron Oakes, on television when Davenport sprayed hairspray in Travis' eyes. Reno Regan's debuted acting like he's from Reno, Nevada doing a bad interview that didn't get over but his work in the ring was decent. Eric Embry has returned from his wing tour of Japan and they are saying he's been out of action from an eye injury caused by Samples so they've got a feud. Television main event saw Lawler and Jarrett vs. Gilberts which ended via DQ when Davenport interfered. Miss Texas made the save, Moondog Fifi hit Texas with a chair and the Moondogs attacked Lawler and Jarrett again as always. Complete August 3rd show has Mr. Fantasy vs. Falk, Riggins vs. Travis, Miller vs. Anthony and Mantell vs. Hornet all in first round matches of a one-night tournament to determine the number one contender for the Southern title, Embry vs. Samples. Street fight with Miss Texas vs. Davenport. Loser leaves town with Pritchard defending the Southern title against Christopher. Take a guess on who is going to win that one. Fuller vs. Lee, Gilberts vs. Rock and Roll Express in a stretcher match and Lawler and Jarrett vs. Moondogs with Fifi's hair up against the tag team titles. August 1st in Nashville drew 900 fans, about triple the usual house, as Falk beat Riggins, Hornet beat Miller via DQ, Texas beat Davenport via countout. Anthony and Embry beat Samples and someone else, Christopher beat Pritchard to keep the Southern title. It won't air that Pritchard had won the belt until the following week on Nashville television, so that's how they work the programs that. Morrell beat Lee via DQ and Moondogs interfered, Rock and Roll Express DDQ Gilberts, Moondogs beat Jarrett and Fuller with Fuller doing a stretcher job and Jarrett won the pole battle royal. July 29th in Evansville saw Falk and Hornet beat Miller and Jeff Daniels, Christopher beat Pritchard to keep the Southern title, Moondogs beat Jarrett and Travis, and Eddie Gilbert beat Ricky Morton via DQ. Texas. July 31st at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 1,565 fans, which is the largest crowd in a long time, although virtually all were freebies, since there were a lot of radio station giveaways and all General Motors employees were admitted free plus they had 50-cent beer night which probably had more to do with whatever paid attendance there was as compared with any of the matcha. Complete results saw Manny Fernandez, who is pretty much running the show as Booker although Skander Akbar holds the official title as Booker, beat Hurricane Mike, Tugboat Taylor pin Masked Avenger, Rick Guerin, Kendo Nagasaki pin Jimmy James, Steve Cox and Jeff Gaylord beat Black Bart and Johnny Mantell via DQ and Fernandez interfere. Skip Young beat Maniac Mike via count out, Bart pinned Chaz Taylor when Stephen Dane and Alexis interfered, Alex Porteau won the GWF light heavyweight title from Terry Sims using the trunks, Ebony Experience beat Gary Young and Dane to win the GWF Tag Team Championship when Akbar's interference backfire. John Tatum managed by Akbar, pinned Scott Putski, Nagasaki and Rod Price beat Young and Dodi Coyote, Manny Villalobos pinned Gary Young when Akbar's interference backfired, Fernandez pinned Cox when Akbar threw an American flag on the floor. Cox went after Akbar so Fernandez got him from behind and pinned him and Putski pinned Johnny Mantell in a singles match when Ivan Putski interfered. Sam Houston no-showed as he was supposed to be the Midnight Rider. They did a Q&A segment and during it Commissioner Joe Castellini talked about bringing in Hulk Hogan and everyone booed the mention of Hogan's name which says something. Nagasaki did an interview praising Japanese auto technology. Remember, this place was loaded with GM employees who got in free and demeaned the U.S. auto companies. A plant fan who is really a local actor who is acting as a GM employee challenged Nagasaki to a match for next week. Fernandez destroyed the car that was given to Villalobos as a present to start up their feud. Gary Hart will be history in 2 more weeks. August 7th at the Sportatorium has Fernandez vs. Villalobos, Tatum vs. Cox, Ebony Experience vs. Blackbirds, King Parsons and Action Jackson, Nagasaki vs. Big Buffalo, the GM employee, Putski vs. Botswana Beast, Kimala 2 in Japan, Tribal Nation, Young Bloods, vs. Tatum and Pry. Chaz Taylor vs. Mantell and Price vs. Sims with 50-cent beer night once again, plus all kids at a local college will be admitted free, so they'll probably have another big crowd. With Fernandez enthusiasm, they went back to customizing the local broadcast starting on August 1st, talking about the card the night before and the show coming up on Friday. Former Dallas Cowboy lineman Harvey Martin did the color commentary on the show. They also officially announced the August 14th bungee cord match between Dane and Chaz. They aired a birthday party for Brandon Baxter, who does the Teen Beat segment on the show, and Maniac Mike pushed Baxter's face into the birthday cake, but Sebastian, this group's clone of Jameson, ran in and put Mike's face in the cake. Gary Hart called Akbar's Devastation Incorporated, Defecation Incorporated on the television color. He was then yanked off the mic in the middle of the match. They aired Fernandez destroying Villalobos' car with an axe. When Villalobos jumped out of his match and tried to stop Fernandez, Price, Mantell and Gary Young held him while Fernandez destroyed it beyond belief. Ivan Putski threatened to come out of retirement to fight Fernandez. Kevin and Kerry Von Erich are making noises about starting up their own promotion in this area. Big D Pro Wrestling on August 2nd in Dallas drew 208 as Sweet Sherry beat Mad Madeline. Big D and Eric Fontaine and Carl Coates over Texas Doll and Ray Evans and Jimmy James. Blackbirds kept their Big D tag belts beating Tatum and Price. Sean Stevens kept the Big D title beating Hurricane Mike when Freddie Fargo interfered and hit Mike with Stevens' belt, and Scott Braddock beat Fernandez via DQ in a lumberjack match for using a jet. Chris Love's August 1st card at Fair Park Arena was cancelled. Here and there. Former wrestler Mad Dog Vachon has received a great deal of press in Canada. He's announced his candidacy for Canada's House of Commons. July 30th, Iowa at the Tampa Sportatorium saw Gary Maggs beat Jeff Bradley, Malenko students Denny Brown beat Mad Bill Dane, Tex Salinger drew Frankie Lancaster, Cuban Assassin beat Stormtrooper after hitting him with a flag, Coconut Man DDQ Lucifer, Steve Collins and Kevin Sullivan and Kendall Windham and Mark Starr beat Dean Malenko and Lou Perez and Jimmy Backlund. Suncoast Pro Wrestling on July 31st in Palmetto, Florida saw Big V, Vern Henderson, and Jerry Flynn, of PWF in Japan, win the tag team title from the Southern Posse. Rick Thames and Sonny T and Rico Federico kept the Florida title beating Raul Mata, plus Dean Malenko beat Superstar Bob Cook under the hood. Steve Gator Wolf ran shows on July 29th in Kiena, Arizona, 266 attendance, July 30th in Tuba City, Arizona, 185, and July 31st in Page, Arizona, 486, with himself versus Jimmy Snuka on top, with DDQs the first two nights and Gator Wolf winning via DQ the third. Channel 69 in Atlanta will most likely be cutting back to just one or two wrestling shows from its big block come September. Scott Hudson and Steve DeTruth have quit doing any wrestling announcing, with Pro Wrestling This Week being part of the slicing process. Joe Pedicino talked with one other station in Atlanta, but talks weren't promising and he may get fully out of the wrestling business as well. Even though Mike Tenney quit the Wrestling Insider's radio show on Tuesday, the show aired on Saturday on the Sports and Entertainment Network with John Studd instead. John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight show remains hanging by a financial thread with only a 30-minute show this past Saturday night. Former newsletter editor Steve Beverly will be starting in September as assistant professor of telecommunications at Valdosta, Georgia, College. The Philadelphia sports bar where Todd Gordon's ECW ran regular shows closed down this past week. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling ran what is probably its final three shows Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. July 30th in Royston, Georgia saw PN News Double Countout Night Stalker, Wahoo McDaniel pinned Shaska Watley, Bambi beat Peggy Lee Leather, Ringlords over Chaz Rocco and Scott Studd via DQ, and Neil Superior beat Ebony Austin. July 31st in Darlington, South Carolina saw Watley pin News, Superior pinned Austin, Colt Steele beat David Isley and Ringlords beat Rocco and Tripper Max via DQ. August 1st in Cerro Gordo, North Carolina saw McDaniel per Watley, Steele beat Isley, News pinned Austin, Ringlords beat Rocco and Max via DQ. In all likelihood, the company no longer exists. Firebreaker Chip worked a show on July 25th in Gastonia for USWF which drew 70 fans. Jimmy Valiant and Ivan Koloff have dates with the group as well. AAA. Tony Arce and Vulcano won the Mexican Tag Team title from Misterioso and Volador on July 28th in Monterrey. July 24th in Aguascalientes saw Rey Mysterio Jr. and Thunderbird and Super Kiss beat Psychosis and El Indomito and Mr. Condor via DQ 2 3/4 stars. Psychosis is the most unheralded superworker on this planet. The end of the second fall was incredible with 3 consecutive Liger dives out of the ring. Thunderbird is supposed to have been the best kept secret in Mexico as he's never worked Mexico City, only Baja California. He looked good, but Mysterio and Psychosis both outshined him. Midgets Dorito Estrada and Picudito and Parquita won 2 straight falls from Piratita Morgan and Pequeno Cobarde and Espectrito when Estrada won straight falls from Morgan to set up their hair versus hair match. Conan El Barbaro and El Psicodelico and Pero Aguayo beat Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Angel Blanco Jr. via DQ in the third fall when El Cobarde Das and El Indomito both interfered after Psicodelico walked out on his teammates to begin his heel tour. Psicodelico, who is a brother of legends Mil Mascaras and Dos Caras, has gotten so out of shape that the minute I saw him, I turned off the TV set and rode my bicycle until Galavision was over. Seriously. They did an incredibly weird hardcore angle out of this match. Cobarde, who lost his hair to Conan in Los Angeles, hit Conan in the jaw with Indomito's handcuffs. Talk about overselling, Conan literally went down and died. He didn't move a muscle. Finally they brought out a stretcher and the heels kept turning over the stretcher and the heat was incredible with the marks literally fighting with the heels as Conan laid on the ground. At one point promoter Antonio Pena decked Cobarde Das which got a big pop. In the ring, Aguayo was bloodied up and destroyed 5-on-1. Finally Conan was stretchered out, and the cameras followed him into an ambulance where they picked up the machine that restarts the heart but never actually put it on him, but they were hovering over him like he was in a coma, and the ambulance sped away with the siren running. It was overdoing it because Conan was already back in action on television the next week. Main event saw Universo 2000 keep the Mexican light heavyweight title, winning 2 out of 3 falls from Mascara Sagrada in what looked more like a Japanese-style mat wrestling match as opposed to lucha style. Psicodelico turned on Sagrada here and caused him to lose. July 31st in Monterrey saw Psychosis and Heavy Metal Casas and Condor beat Mysterio Jr. and Winners and Supercolo. In the second fall I'm told they had the bump of the year when Mysterio missed a moonsault out of the ring and landed flat on the floor to be counted out, which was what was intended, which tells you about his guts and brains. 3.5 stars. Estrada beat Morgan in the midget hair versus hair match when Big Jerry Estrada interfered after Morgan threw water in the ref's face, and after he KO'd Morgan, Little Estrada made him submit. Morgan got his head shaved. This was probably his final AAA match as he and Midget Espectrito are jumping back to EMLL. Those were Mascara de Sagrada's favorite opponents. 2 3/4 stars in main event saw Carson Fishman and Cobarde Das beat Conan and Aguayo and Psicodelico in 2 straight falls with Psicodelico never tagging in. 2 3/4 stars. The AAA formed its own wrestlers union with officers named being Fuerza Guerrera, Ice Killer. Can you imagine forming a union and the vice president of the union is named Ice Killer? Justiciero Magante Solari Dorel Dixon, the same Dory Dixon who headlined Madison Square Garden in the days of Buddy Rogers, Vicky Carranza, Io del Diablo, who just jumped, Rambo, Alcone 78, Octagon and one of the Micro Destructors. Tinieblas Jr. and Sr. have finally jumped to this group. This group is negotiating with a 30,000-seat Palacio de Deportes in Mexico City to run major shows both for this group and for the WWF. EMLL. This was Apollo Dantes week. Dantes won the NWA World Light Heavyweight title from El Satanico on July 25 in Puebla. This makes the Dantes family the second family in NWA history for a father and a son to hold the same world title, since Alfonso Dantes held the same belt 4 times between 1972-81. The only other father and son combo was the Guerreros, as Gory Guerrero held the NWA Light Heavyweight title between 1960-66 and Chavo Guerrero held the belt in 1977. Dantes also beat Comando Russo in a hair versus hair match on July 29 in Cuernavaca, and in grudge matches scored 3 different singles wins over El Hijo del Solitario. On the same July 29 Cuernavaca card, Dandy retained his CMLL middleweight title beating Negro Casas. Dandy also beat Casas in a title defense on July 19 in Villa Hermosa. Felino, the younger brother of Casas, won the CMLL welterweight title from America on July 16 in Cuernavaca and retained it with a win on July 29 in Ecatapan. Felino also holds the Mexican welterweight title, so he's the first person to hold both a national and world title in Mexico simultaneously, since Dandy held the middleweight world and national titles at the same time in 1990. La Serenita won the Mexican women's title from Neftali on July 17 in Cuautla. This group is introducing a new crew of midgets to go along with Morgan and Espectrito, who jumped back, including Ultimate Dragon Cheeto, Ciclanito Ramirez, Mascara de Magica, and a trio called the Pequeno Untouchables. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. retained the Mexican heavyweight title, beating MS1 on July 29 in Naucalpan after MS1 had won a non-title match on July 22 in the same arena. Brazo de Plata is out of action for health reasons because of his heart problems. The next card at Arena Mexico will be September 4. with the biggest show of the year set for September 18th. Already announced is Genichiro Tenryu appearing. They also announced a tag match with Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada vs Manami Toyota and Asia Kong. The Mexican fans should go nuts over Toyota. July 31st at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Arcangel de la Muerte and Guerrero de la Muerte and a new American whose name we didn't get beat Aguila Solitaria and Metallico and Eclipse 2.5 stars. Dantes and Ciclón Ramirez and Cacho Mendoza beat Felino and Javier Cruz and Solitario via DQ when Solitario posted Dantes, who juiced heavy 2 1/4 stars. Big Bang, Jack victory under a mask, and Supremo and Gran Marcus Jr. beat Aaron Grundy, Mike Shaw and Dandy and Mascara Magica Eddie Guerrero in straight falls when Grundy accidentally splashed Dandy and Magica. Grundy is probably going to turn heel and use the ring name Moccansing, although that isn't definite. 2.5 stars in main event saw the Super Rudo trio of Casas and Emilio Charles Jr. and Bestia Salvaje beat Atlantis and Lizmark and Ultimate Dragon when Charles made Atlantis submit clean in the third fall to set up an Atlantis vs. Charles match for the NWA middleweight title on August 7th. 4-star. UWA. July 26th at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Coquina and Gigante Warrior and Buffalo Allen win the Battle of Heels in 2 straight falls, beating Connect and Zando Khan and Dr. Wagner Jr. when Coquina pinned Connect to win the second fall. Dos Caras and Villano Trace beat Headhunter, Scorpio Jr. and Shu El Guerrero and Bucanero Jr. and Cajos beat Lasser and El Matematico I and Oo de Tigra and Ninja Turtle I. Villano V and Enrique Vera and Sato, Sakigaki Gantetsu, beat the Death Missionaries, El Signo and Ingro Navarro and Black Power Das, The King and Villano 1 and Villano 4 beat Arrow Flash and Transformer and Canadian Tig, Mike Lazansky and Ninja Sasuke and Celestial beat Zeus and El Engendro. New Japanese wrestler headed and called Kuroneko is New Japan's prelim wrestler Black Cat. They'll be holding a tournament to crown a new UWA Junior Light Heavyweight Champion in September. Last champ was Pero Aguayo, who quit the promotion. August 2nd El Torreo show was headlined by Connect vs. Coquina. WWF. Randy Savage was on the Arsenio Hall talking about the match with Ultimate Warrior, and wouldn't you know it, that Hall fed him a question about steroids. Savage said he didn't use them, that they were poison, and told kids not to use them, but admitted experimenting with them at one point. Yeah, I've experimented with using a typewriter at one point. Both Helen Hart, Brett's mother, and Diana Hart Smith, Davey Boy's wife and Brett's sister, were interviewed on TV pushing the Hart vs. Bulldog match as they are pushing the family angle big time. The promotion and hype for SummerSlam has been excellent. It'll be real interesting to see how a pay-per-view does with the new public negative attitude toward pay-per-views stemming from the Olympics, which just died, plus no Hulk Hogan. On the upside, they are doing a tremendous job hyping the major matchups and making it seem like an international major event because of the location. Every time I see what a great job they're doing in that aspect, it makes me think that WCW has had nearly 2 years to beat them to the punch in that same vein, and basically ignored the opportunity. Tito Santana is replacing Kerry Von Erich in the SS match with Papa Shango. On the television show that aired August 2nd in London, they were still pushing tickets for Wembley Stadium as still being available. There is something really fishy going on, and it's in England, not Denmark. Let's figure this out. We're supposed to believe they sold 70,000 tickets in the first day, but now 5 weeks later they still haven't sold another 10,000 tickets. Let alone those original reports listed everywhere of selling out the entire building in 4 hours. Well, WCW exaggerated about ticket sales in Japan for the NWA tournament, but the WWF gets its money's worth. Don't believe for a second any rumors of Ric Flair jumping to WCW at this point. Bill Alfonso definitely jumped as he refereed the tug-of-war between the heel wrestlers and bodybuilders, which the wrestlers won 2 of 3 when Ted DiBiase paid Alfonso off. Nobody did the job in this one, which would have consisted of being dragged into the water. The September house show lineups will have one card consisting of Savage vs. Razor Ramon, Undertaker vs. Flair, Hart vs. Shango, Natural Disasters vs. Beverly Brothers for the tag team titles, Virgil vs. Shawn Michaels, Tito Santana vs. Mountie, and High Energy vs. Skinner and Barry Horowitz. The other show will have Ultimate Warrior vs. Kimala, Big Boss Man vs. Nails, Bulldog vs. Repo Man, Nasty Boys vs. Money Incorporated, Smell a Nasty Boys turn coming, Tatanka vs. Rick Martel, although a Martel turn is coming as well, Crush vs. Berserker, and Jim Powers vs. Brooklyn Brawl. A benefit show was held on August 3rd in Stamford, Connecticut, headlined by Flair vs. Savage, will the proceeds, in excess of $50,000, donated to the Stamford Library Fund. July 31st in Los Angeles drew 7,700 as Virgil pinned Skinner 1 1/2 star, Bossman beat Nails via DQ 1 1/4 stars. Legion of Doom and Paul Ellering beat Beverly Brothers and Genius 1 1/2 star. Savage pinned Flair 3 1/2 star. Santana pinned Kato dud. Undertaker pinned Berserker 1/2 of 1 star and Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated via DQ 1/4 of 1 star. August 2nd at the San Francisco Cow Palace drew 7,500 as Virgil pinned Skinner dud. Santana pinned Kato 1 star. Undertaker pinned Berserker 1 star. Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated via DQ 3/4 of a star. Legion of Doom and Ellering beat Beverly Brothers and Genius 1 star. Bossman beat Nails via DQ dud and Warrior pinned Shango dud. TV ratings were back down last weekend with Primetime doing a 2.2 and All-American a 1.9 while Body Stars did an 0.6. Variety magazine had a Puff Wrestling piece where Ed Cohen claimed they sold 82,000 tickets to Wembley Stadium in one day. July 19th in Hyannis, Massachusetts drew a sellout 2,800 as Powers pinned Kato 2 1/4 stars, Tatanka pinned Martel 1 1/4 stars, Samoans, Samu and Fatu, beat Bushwhackers 1 star, Jim Duggan beat Flair via DQ 1 1/4 star, Latin Fury Conan El Barbaro, beat Pete Doherty 3/4 of a star, Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated via countout 1/4 of 1 star. July 25th in Chicago drew 3,600 as Virgil pinned Kato 1 star, Bushwhackers beat Beverly Brothers dud, Bossman beat Nails via DQ 1 1/2 star, Bret Hart pinned Martel 1 star, Legion of Doom Animal pinned Repo Man dud, Nasty Boys beat High Energy dud and Warrior pinned Shango dud. European tour after SummerSlam will be September 23rd to October 6th, with them running one crew in the US and the other crew in Europe during that time period. August 2nd in Philadelphia drew 6,000 as Crush beat Berserker, High Energy beat Nasty Boys, Mountie pinned Sergeant Slaughter, Savage pinned Flair with Duggan as ref, Tatanka pinned Martel, Bushwhackers beat Michaels and Repo Man and Bret Hart beat Cmll via DQ. August 1st at the Nassau Coliseum drew 6,000 as Michaels beat Butch Miller, Luke Williams pinned Brawler, Nasty Boys beat High Energy, Tatanka pinned Martel, Crush and Slaughter beat Mountie and Repo Man, Bret Hart beat Cmll via DQ and Savage pinned Flair with Duggan as ref. July 30th in Bakersfield saw Santana beat Kato, Legion of Doom and Ellering beat Beverly Brothers and Genius, Virgil beat Skinner, Money Incorporated beat Disasters via DQ, Nails beat Bossman via DQ, Undertaker pinned Berserker and Savage pinned Flair. WCW. The October 25th pay-per-view show has been moved from Baltimore to Philadelphia for reasons having to do mainly with satellite transmission problems. Card for September 2nd at Center Stage for the Clash will be announced on the August 15th television shows. August 1st in Philadelphia drew 2,000 as Bobby Eaton pinned Michael Hayes, sub for Larry Zbyszko, who showed up with his arm in a cast selling the broken arm angle they shot earlier in the week at Center Stage, even though it hadn't aired on television because that's how Watts is going to do thing. Medusa pinned Heidi Lee. Morgan Dustin Rhodes pinned Greg Valentine in a match which could only end with a bulldog or a figure four. Steve Austin drew Barry Windham. Steiners beat Steve Williams and Terry Gordy in a non-title match. Rick Steamboat pinned Cactus Jack in a Falls Count Anywhere match. Super, Sting and Ron Simmons beat Big Van Vader and Super Invader, and Nikita Koloff pinned Rick Rude in a non-title match. Bill Watts was at the show and chewed out several of the wrestlers regarding their performances. Elliot Murnick has been rehired as promoter for North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia. Murnick promoted tons of cities for the Crockett's but was dumped by Jim Hurd. New announcing lineup starting August 22nd will have Ross and co-host on WCW Saturday Night, with Watts frequently as co-host. Main event will have Ross and Hayes. Power Hour will be a magazine format with Schiavone and Zbyszko. Worldwide will stay with Schiavone and Ventura. Pro, which will probably air in far fewer markets come September, will have Bischoff and Magnum TA. Syndicated main event will have Bischoff and Teddy Long. The KTVU Channel 2 slot in the SF Bay Area was dropped this week, which means not to expect any house shows in these parts for the foreseeable future. Brad Armstrong was to find out on August 3rd about whether or not he'd need major surgery after blowing out his knee in Japan on July 21st. He'll definitely be out of action for a few weeks, but it could be longer. TV ratings saw WCW Saturday Night Show an apparent sign of life doing a 2.5 on July 25th for the show headlined by Koloff vs. Anderson. However, main event on July 26th did a 2.0 and Power Hour a 1.4. August 2nd in Baltimore before 4,000 paid besides the title change and Nikita Rude match with Roberts debuting saw Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton beat Marcus Bagwell and Brian Pillman when Bagwell submitted to an armlock. Since they are going back in time, Anderson and Eaton are suddenly Gene and Ole Anders. Barry Windham pinned Smothers. Cactus Jack beat Steamboat via count out after delivering the elbow off the apron in 7:52 and Steamboat had to be helped out, so they are going to prolong their marriage. Zank pinned Smothers. Wyndham and Rhodes beat Slater and Valentine. A Bagwell vs. Jobber match saw Vader come in and destroy both, and dark match finale saw Gordy and Williams beat Steiners in 2 out of 3 fall. Talk is that Sting Vader were right at 4 stars every night this past week. Terry Taylor is definitely through and is trying to get back with the WWF or indie dates. He was offered a spot to come back under a hood as Mr. Wrestling 3, a protege of Mr. Wrestling 2, but it isn't going to materialize. July 24th in St. Joseph drew 1,100 as Zank and Bagwell beat Freebirds, Eaton pinned Zabishko, Steve Austin pinned Big Josh, Steamboat pinned Jack, Wyndham pinned Valentine, Sting and Simmons beat Vader and Super Invader, Rude pinned Rhodes, excellent match, and Gordy and Williams beat Steiners in 2 out of 3 fall mat. Not good. In what is probably Taylor's last television match that aired on Saturday, Scotty Flamingo lost a 3¼ stars match to Zank and Bagwell. This was actually more exciting and action-packed than the Steamboat Austin match which followed, which was a solid match as well. Steamboat Austin went 18 minutes, which is okay since Steamboat is such a great worker. He mainly sold the legit rib injury like crazy. An occasional long match is something different on TV gives it meaning. When you've got super workers involved, like all Japan's TV mains, the longer the match, the better. But as a steady weekly diet, I don't think today's fans have the attention span for average or even well above average workers trying to do 20-minute television bouts. That's it for this issue. We will be back after this short break. Hit that subscribe button. Hello wrestling fans. Pro Wrestle Machine is back. Hello to all the new followers. If this is your first time here, I'm a robot. Let's jump back in time to 1992. August 10, 1992 Observer Newsletter. Ron Simmons wins WCW title. Follow-up on recent major stories. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228. August 10, 1992. Ron Simmons captured the WCW World Heavyweight title on August 2 in Baltimore by pinning Big Van Vader in 9:46 at the Worldwide Wrestling Television taping, with a power slam. The match was said to have been very good. It, along with the angle that debuted Jake Roberts, will air in a 6 minutes highlight block on TBS this coming weekend. The entire match was taped for television and will at some point air in its entirety, although I'm not certain when and what show that will be on. Vader had been advertised to defend the title against Sting on Sunday's night's card. However, earlier in the taping an angle was set up where Roberts came out of the audience and gave Sting 2 DDTs on a chair, and Sting did a stretcher job and was unable to wrestle in the main event. Bill Watts and Grizzly Smith came out with the top 7 contenders. Unfortunately, this crew didn't include U.S. champ Rick Rude or TV champ Steve Austin, and instead had Dan Spivey, Van Hammer, Simmons, Barbarian, Cactus Jack, Dustin Rhodes and one another, and announced they had their names in